Diane Barrett with Carrie Hamblen. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did.
Good. And we're here with the BE collection. It is July 21st. So thank you for being a part of the collection. I like your background.
Thank you. It was interesting during the pandemic how we all started being a little bit more aware of what's behind us and being really strategic about it.
Good point. That's right.
Mhm.
This is who we are. This is what we represent. This is our faith. It's good observation.
Mhm.
Anyway, as you know, the collection is based on your occupation, how you made the progress to where you are today. Also occupations you've had in the past that led you to this art, and just generally about your life,
Okay.
with the idea that you'll inspire other lesbians to take the step. Because a lot of our steps are unknown to us because we haven't talked to anybody that made them.
Mhm.
We have ideas perhaps, but not the knowledge that we need.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. What is your occupation?
So I have the wonderful privilege of wearing two hats. My day job is that I'm the CEO and president of the Las Cruces Green Chamber of Commerce, and we talk about the importance of locally owned businesses and protecting our air, land, and water and creating sustainable communities. And my volunteer job is that I serve as a state senator in the New Mexico legislature.
And do you aspire to expand that to?
I don't know. I don't know yet. I still am in my first term. I'm in my first term. I mean, I've, as a queer person, been really involved in politics pretty much most of my adult life, and so it's not a new thing for me, but we'll see. I'd still like to get comfortable in my service as a state senator before I think about some other things.
How long have you been in that position?
This is my first term, so this is my third year. Senators in the state of New Mexico have a 4-year term, and so I go up for re-election next year.
How arduous is that?
It all depends on the district. We just went through redistricting like many legislatures across the country because of the 2020 census, which is typical. You look at how many people are in your district and how many people are in the state and wanting to make sure that there's equal representation. And so my district is predominantly Democrat. It's predominantly Latino. I live in the southern part of the state. And sorry, my cat is deciding he wants to be part of this as well.
I understand.
Yeah. And so it's running a campaign is tough. My campaign was in during the pandemic. And so it was a really challenging time to get and connect with people. However, I do well on social media, and that's where I was able to reach out to people and also making phone calls every day because I wasn't going to jeopardize people's health by going door to door. And so, so it was a strange time, but it was fascinating as well to talk to people and also reach them through different social media outlets.
That's when we started this collection.
Yeah.
Because we were bored, restless, and stuck.
Right. And it's a great way of, the thing is that we have situations where there are people who don't have access to broadband. New Mexico is one of those. And we have a lot of rural communities in my district, especially that aren't in a very high socioeconomic bracket. And broadband we saw during the pandemic was critical for education. And, a lot of these folks who have been trying to create more awareness about the lack of infrastructure are kind of like, oh, welcome to the party. Glad you were able to finally make it. And it took a pandemic to get other people on board of realizing how important that was.
There's a lot of positives about the pandemic, such as.
Yeah, certainly.
Also what we're doing. We've interviewed over 150 women. So it's amazing where it's going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where are you from? That state, New Mexico? Are you?
No, my back history is that my family is originally from Wisconsin. My father was in the military, and so we moved around a lot. I grew up in El Paso, which is about 45 minutes away from Las Cruces, New Mexico. We are in the southern part of the state. Prior to that, we were in Germany for 3 years because my father was stationed there. But living in El Paso, we really found that we enjoyed the desert a whole lot more than winter storms. And I am not one who likes snow. And my wife is from Chicago and she does not like snow. So we have found our perfect home in the desert.
I'm from Chicago.
Are you? Okay. So she grew up in the Park Ridge area.
I'm from Roseland, which is the south side, and then my parents lived in Olympia Fields, so she would know that.
Okay. Yeah. And so I was born in Wauwatosa. And so yeah, there's a reason why we're living in the desert. Even though at this time of this recording we are experiencing record high temperatures, but climate change isn't happening. So
No, that's good.
yeah, please note the sarcasm in my voice. Yeah.
I came to Los Angeles in January 6th. So I was leaving the winter behind me.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And it was a good decision.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I still like Chicago. Not the same.
Chicago's great. It's a great city. And I think we find that with all of our travels is like, what is it about a city? And my wife knows, a bunch of people still there, and it's just it's a great city.
So then you arranged here. Then what was your first, would you say, formal occupation?
So I grew up with a single parent. My mom raised my brother and I. My father passed away when I was 12. And one of the things that my mom, I tell people about this, that my mom kind of taught me strategy and to think about ways that, and as queer people, we use strategy all the time. And when I was 12, my mom said, you should go volunteer at the pool. Swimming runs in my family, especially the female side of my family, good swimmers. And she's like, you should go volunteer at the pool and be a swim teacher. And then when they're able to hire you when you're of age, then they know what kind of employee you are, which is true, true. And so
how old were you when you took on that job?
I was 13. I would ride my bike to the pool. They could contract me, and it was a swim instructor position during swimming lessons during the summer, so they could do that. And so when I turned 16, I became a manager and a lifeguard and ran the pools in El Paso for about 7 years, I think, until I was 23. And then I decided to move to Las Cruces, right up the road, to go for a master's degree. I have a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism, and I have a master's degree in communication studies and a master's in public administration. But my master's in communication studies is what brought me up to Las Cruces. But also New Mexico at the time, this was in the 90s, New Mexico was really progressive in protection of queer people. We had one of the strongest anti-discrimination clauses in the country. So even if you were perceived to be queer, and I just use that as an umbrella term, there are many of us who, when we came out when we were younger, it was either just lesbian or gay, and then bisexual came in, and then transgender came in, and then there's all these different letters. Right. And so
choices, lesbian maybe exited.
Right. Well, and I use the term queer just to be inclusive of especially young people who are finding a place for themselves in that umbrella. And so New Mexico was really progressive in terms of its protection of queer people. And, that was right after I came out. I came out when I was 22 to my mom. And like a lot of queer folks, it's like, I don't want to have to come out to my family, so I'm going to leave so I can be who I am without having to deal with my family. And I was going to do that. I was going to go to Austin, Texas, and go to the UT system there. But then I met a girl who she was going to school at New Mexico State University, which is the major university here in Las Cruces. And I decided to go and pursue my graduate degree here, and then decided to stay and found protection in New Mexico that I wasn't seeing nor ever expected in Texas.
So when you decided to leave, what preparations did you make about doing that?
Full disclosure, I am an adult child of an alcoholic, so predictability is really important. Yes, so this, like super predictable, responsible, tries to take care of people, sometimes not necessarily the best approach. And so from the time I was starting to pull a paycheck at 14, I started buying things for my apartment. People call it like a hope chest. Well, I knew I wasn't getting married,
right?
And because it just wasn't available at the time. And so I started buying stuff for my apartment. And so I had everything for my apartment when I was ready to move in. and
Yeah.
didn't have a whole lot of struggle. So I prepared that way,
That's a
but
really good suggestion.
yeah,
What you can't afford today, you'll afford tomorrow.
right.
I mean,
Yeah. So that's how I, just with regarding to just the logistics of moving. It's Las Cruces is literally 45 minutes away from El Paso. So it wasn't a significant like emotional prepare. I was ready to live on my own.
Hmm.
And I'd gotten a job as a student employee at the public radio station because I got my undergraduate degree in broadcast journalism, and so started working and going to graduate school and having a 1-bedroom apartment and with my girlfriend, and then started trying to navigate being a person who was on the air. So I was at the public radio station. I was started out as a classical music host, and then worked my way up to being the morning news anchor for Morning Edition, and then the operations manager, and hosting my own program. And I was really trying to figure out how to be active in LGBTQ causes, but not jeopardizing my role as a journalist. So I would do a lot of behind the scenes stuff.
like, for example.
For example, I helped get the anti-discrimination clause on the books at the state by organizing and providing support for volunteers who were talking to people. So I publicly couldn't talk to people about the issue, in my capacity as a journalist. I did do interviews for my public affairs program on those things, but I was always really cognizant of how to make sure that I didn't blur those lines. And but then after a while, people started getting to know me as, oh, Carrie, she's the gay one. And but also, when you go back into your question, Diane, about preparing, one of the things though that I think we as a community have a tendency of doing is being really strategic. And so I looked for a job at an NPR station because I knew at the time that NPR was one of the first employers to offer domestic partner benefits to their staff.
I didn't know that. That's good to know.
Yeah. And so I was like, I'm going to work at an NPR station and I'm going to work at a university because at least the chances of people being a little bit more progressive and accepting are a little bit higher. And so there was that strategy of like making sure I would feel safe in my job.
So how did you find out? Did you call them, their personnel department, and ask what their benefits were?
No, I remember seeing it wasn't the university. So New Mexico State didn't have those benefits at the time. I just knew the value of NPR. And I think I'd seen an article about it that they had offered domestic partner benefits. Because the web was just starting when I started in the field. And so it sounds so weird to say. But I think I'd seen an article or heard a report about it that NPR was offering domestic partner benefits. And so I wanted to at least be attached to an affiliated station with that. The university, for many NPR stations, the universities that they're located on holds their license. So they're the ones who offer the benefits. And so at the time, New Mexico State didn't offer that. And so I was able to work with a group of other staff members of the university to try and get domestic partner benefits. And we got that in 1995.
Now, at that time, did you have a domestic partner?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Did you have to declare her identity when you signed her up?
Yes, I did. But then, yeah, and then that relationship ended, so that I didn't have to, but at least it was protecting,
right,
myself and also really it was a fairness in employment. It wasn't
no,
the argument was like, oh, we're supporting these types of relationships. I'm like, no, it's fairness in employment, you idiot. It's fairness in employment.
to the point.
Yeah. So yeah, so it was good. I mean, we've seen a lot of changes in New Mexico since I moved here. Not because of me, but we've seen a lot of changes, and it's
It
been
sounds
really
like you've been a significant part of things. Just
good. A little bit.
all
A
right.
little bit. Yeah. Yeah. But it was using my position as a public figure, and that's where it was kind of like a turning point. Was like, how can I use my position as a public figure to help elevate the face? Because it's easy to go ahead and be a jerk and say these people don't need to have rights when you don't know anybody, right? And so for many people, that I didn't even know I was their friend. I was the person they woke up to every morning on the news.
Mhm.
And so I would like slowly and strategically start bringing in parts of my personal life that that people would go, oh, okay, I really like Carrie. I
She's
guess I
all
should get
right.
on. I guess I should get on the bandwagon and support this too. But also at the same time, I was the president of PFLAG, our local chapter in Las Cruces, and also at one point for about 6 years was leading our Pride organization. And so, but that was kind of further down the line where I didn't have to worry about people going, oh, you
So
know, yeah. So I had that luxury as a white person, as a person of privilege, as a person who has an education.
Mhm.
I didn't have to worry about a lot of things that other people did.
Unless you had experience.
Yeah,
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 that
yeah.
does count, right?
It does. It
Uh,
does. Certainly.
So then you moved into politics.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple things. So, working behind the scenes, it was always, political in terms of getting domestic partner benefits there, making sure that queer folks had protections and credit and employment and housing. Through my capacity as the president of PFLAG, we could write things as the board of directors and support policy.
Ah,
So we were able to do that, and our PFLAG chapter is still, in over 30 years it's been in existence, still very active in the community and very much a go-to organization when it comes down to making sure that the queer voice is heard. And so, but I also had to walk a fine line as a journalist. I could not really have an opinion. I
mm,
wasn't supposed to. And I took that very seriously. So I was always very careful about what hat I was wearing. But a lot of the work that I did was political, but it wasn't until 2015 that I thought about running for office. And
2015.
mhm.
Right.
And in like most legislatures, you have a House of Representatives and a Senate, and the House terms are 2 years apart, 2 years, and then senators are 4 years. And given that I came from public radio where I was fundraising twice a year, I didn't want to do that in a 2 year spot because that's really what you're doing the entire time as a rep. You are campaigning and fundraising and trying to legislate at the same time, which is, I don't know how they do it. And so I knew I wanted to go for a Senate position, but at the time, the person who was in this position was a woman who had been there for 16 years at the time. By the time I defeated her, it was 20 years. And she had some concerning votes. I have a great deal of respect for her. Her name is Mary Kay Papin, and a great deal of respect for what she's done, especially regarding mental health issues. But there were some things that she was pretty old-fashioned about. We had a law on the
She'd be
books.
comfortable with her name being mentioned in this video.
I think that would be fine. I mean,
Right.
she's a public figure. She's
Right.
very much involved still in the community, and I have the utmost respect for her.
Mhm.
But some of her votes were very concerning. So in New Mexico, we had a law on the books that dated back to 1969 that criminalized women who chose to get abortions and the people who provided them. We had, efforts to legalize adult use cannabis and expunge the records of people who have been arrested for 2 ounces or less of possession, which our criminal justice system and the systemic racism there, it's pretty much black and brown men. And we also have a permanent land grant fund, which is funded by oil and gas reserves. And that's a $19 billion fund. And we can
How do you
use,
educate people about all this? Say, you're trying to get people to support you, vote for you, etc. You have so much knowledge that the average person, including myself, doesn't even know. So
right. That's what
people,
those phone calls were. The phone calls that I was doing to constituents when I was running for office,
uh,
really helping them on that and saying, I'm not speaking out of line here. These are her
right,
votes on these issues.
uh,
And so, and it's really interesting because I think, we've done a disservice to young people by removing civics lessons in class in school because a lot of people don't know about the process and what happens. And so the Mary Kay, she was the president pro tem of the Senate, which is the most powerful position except for the lieutenant governor, who is the presiding member of our Senate. And so what she would do is she had the power to choose committee chairs. So when a bill gets introduced, then it gets assigned to committees. Those committees kind of workshop the bill. And then once it passes those committees, then it goes on to the Senate floor for debate. Once it passes debate, then it goes to the House for the same process. The thing is, if a bill never made it to committee, the bill would die. And so there was encouragement to not hear these bills in those committees.
I can see why.
Right.
I
And
learned that.
so, and so there was really this effort. We had, 5 what they call Democrats in name only, and they were really kind of conservative Democrats who were holding these seats and keeping these bills from getting heard. And so there was a movement throughout the state to unseat these 5 Democrats in name only. And in 2020, 4 of those 5 were unseated.
Wow,
by
it's
freshmen.
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so
Wow.
in our legislative session, we had 7 freshman Democrats as senators. And this is where I always tell people elections matter, because in our case, the legalizing adult use cannabis passed by 7 votes.
Mhm.
6 of those were freshmen. Repealing the anti-abortion law was passed by 6 votes. We have an end-of-life options act, so it's a death with dignity. That one passed by a small margin. Adult use cannabis.
When did you pass death with dignity?
That was passed 2 years ago. It's called the Elizabeth Whitefield End-of-Life Options Act.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a big deal. And it was so important for me when I cast my vote on that day. My wife and I have had a friend who suffered horribly from Parkinson's.
Mhm.
She was this brilliant artist, old school lesbian. She was actually featured in the documentary Feminists, What Were They Thinking? And her name was Cheryl Swanick, and she was just a brilliant person. And she wound up getting Parkinson's, and her home was in Las Cruces. But she and her wife also, they split their time between Las Cruces and Washington, D.C., because her wife was a professor at American University. But when her suffering started getting to the point where it was just, we weren't seeing Cheryl anymore, she was able to end her suffering, but she could only do it in Washington, D.C., and not in the home state where she loved. And when I cast that vote, I was the next day, while there was a debate on the bill, oftentimes we have a lot of time, I was writing my social media post about why this is important. And I looked up when Cheryl had ended her suffering, and it just so happened that the day before when I cast that vote was the 1-year anniversary. Yeah.
You'll never forget that, huh?
Nope. Mm-mm.
No, I actually spoke with someone whose lover, they weren't able to be married because it's before the marriage enactment for gays. And she was not allowed to make decisions in end of life. It was, imagine.
It's awful. Yeah. I mean, and you can go through medical powers of attorney and all of that stuff, but all it takes is one family member to argue that, and that's why I remember, how important it was that it was passed not only in New Mexico. So in 2000, everywhere. In 2013, our county commissioner, our county clerk, who is an attorney, saw a loophole in our state constitution that said marriage is between person A and person B. And so he started issuing marriage licenses. And one of my future colleagues in the Senate tried to issue an injunction to stop that. But my wife and I were the 5th couple to get married in Doña County, which is the county where we live. And then, the following year, the Supreme Court ruled that it is legal. And so it was a big deal.
Good for you. So how long have you been with your wife?
We have been together since 2006, but we have been legally married since 2013.
Good for you.
Thank you.
We look forward to meeting her. Tell her that.
Yeah, no, I will let her know.
Right.
Yeah. She's on a Zoom in the back room. She's a professor at the University of Texas at El Paso, which is really kind of a complicated situation because they don't have any protections for their queer staff and faculty.
It's amazing.
And it is amazing. It's only 45 minutes away, and it's El Paso, which is pretty much considered more blue as compared to the rest of the state. You know, El Paso and Austin are kind of the blue areas of that state. But the UT system is out of Austin. And that one, you know, boards of regents are political appointees. And we see that with the UT system, that there are some challenges right now. Their governor, they actually passed legislation that would remove tenure from a professor if they're teaching critical race theory.
Whoa, this is like, it's very important that this be announced, I think. And obviously you do too. But I mean, because the rest of us, we go about our daily work, which is important. And then all these things come fluttering in into your news feed. And I mean, you say, wow, that was going on. I was doing X. Any gays in your family, biologic family?
No. Actually, one of my distant cousins is. But my father died when I was 12. My brother died in a freak car accident in 1995. So it's just my mom and I as family. I do have a niece. So I don't, you know, not that I know of. I only know of one cousin on my father's side that is queer.
We don't, we record in the archives at Cal State Dominguez Hills. They do make a note when they summarize what you and I do right now about the genetic links. And it's pretty incredible that
Yeah,
it's, I'd say it's over 80%.
wow. Yeah.
So we don't have to wonder about it. It's right there.
Yeah.
For me, I was watching the women down the street. They were having such a good time. I didn't know that they were lesbians, but I figured it out here. Looked like a positive.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's interesting because we find, you know, I remember, oh gosh, it had to be in like the 6th or 7th grade. And I was looking through, no, it was in college. It was right before I came out that I came across a book for a research project. And in there, it talked about non-verbally queer people recognizing other queer people. You know, and this was in the 90s. And so it was usually like an extended gaze or a little bit of a head nod. Or of course, are you a friend of Dorothy or are you a family member, right? Remember those?
Dorothy.
Yeah. And so, you know, I remember like being really fascinated about that nonverbal connection that we do to acknowledge each other. And so I have my bachelor's is in broadcast journalism, but my master's in communication studies really focuses on nonverbal behavior. And it was because, now that I think about it, it was because of that book, because I was like, I want to see how our body tells people what we do instead of what we say.
That was also in one of the interviews, because we're now interviewing generations. We started 30, but we go on forever. And someone was saying that there was no way for her to know who was gay. And so she went to a room with a woman who probably thought she was gay. And the woman said, that one is, that one isn't, that one is. And that's how she knew. I mean,
yeah.
amazing.
Well, you know, in Las Cruces, we don't have like a gay center. We don't have, like in LA, you've got the queer center there. We don't have that. And we have a couple of known queer owned businesses. But when queer people move to Las Cruces, until they figure out that there's a P flag or a pride, they're kind of like, where are all the gays? And you know, for many years I was kind of like the gay Rolodex. I was just like, oh, let me once you connect people, then you're going to go, holy cow, there are a lot of queer people. Because in the 90s, Las Cruces was known as kind of like a lesbian nesting ground where lesbians would come and raise their families, and which is really interesting. And now it's across the board. We've got, you know, queer folks of all types here, and it's also, you know, New Mexico is known as one of the safest places in the country for queer and trans kids because of legislation that we have. And I can talk about that if you want.
No, I think the trans is a big transition that we're all going through. We don't know how to do it either.
Right. You know, and I always tell people, you know, in my capacity as the president of PFLAG, I was like, I can't imagine. I don't have the capacity to imagine what it's like to wake up every morning and look at my body and say, this isn't me.
Mhm.
And so, but we're also horrible about eating our own. If you think about it, Diane, like, in the early days when it was just lesbian or gay, we weren't the most welcoming. Our community was not the most welcoming to folks who identified as bisexual. And then we were even worse with trans people. And yet it's because of the Stonewall riot that trans people stood up. And that's when the start of our gay rights movement. And so, I kind of use that as it's my obligation to make sure that I can stand behind my trans brothers and sisters to make sure their voices are heard, because we ignored them as a community for so long.
Mhm. As a politician, you're absolutely right.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Do you think anyone would ever challenge you on that?
I thought about that when I ran for office, if it would have been a big deal. And that was a question that was always brought up by consultants and groups that I worked with. And I said, if they're going to make a big deal that I'm a lesbian, then what rock have they been living under, for crying out loud? I have been out as a lesbian in Las Cruces since 1992. And if somebody is bringing that up now as an issue, I'd be like, you're grasping for straws, because that's a non-issue. And during the campaign, you see this a lot. You get like these little mailers in your post, that I as a CEO of the Green Chamber, I hate wasting paper. So I would
Oh, I
always
think of the cost of that, all the stuff that I stand at the trash can and throw out.
right. It's awful. So I actually purge my lists and remove those that I know that are going to vote for me. I don't send them their stuff. They don't need it. And they're like, great, quit wasting
Right.
paper.
Thank you.
Right. But on one of those mailers, because my primary it was a big deal, because I was trying to unseat this woman who had done some incredible things, but some of her recent votes were really concerning and holding New Mexico back. And so my primary race was my big race. My general election was not,
Mhm.
just because of the Democratic polling index and just the amount of Democrats that were in my district. And so one of my mailers had a picture of my wife and I on our wedding day.
Ah, how nice.
And yeah, and what I found was when I was calling people, there were people who were like, "Oh, you're the one with the wife, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I am." And they're like, "Oh, that's great. My daughter's a lesbian. We can't wait to vote for you."
Ah, how
And I was
nice.
like,
Yeah.
awesome. And living your truth, having the luxury of living your truth is golden. And I always think of how there are so many people who still can't. And in New Mexico, we've got a strong Latino Mexican influence and cultural influence. It's really hard to be out when you've got a family that's got some strong religious roots. And we still see it, that, there are kids who get kicked out because they're queer. And that's heartbreaking for me.
I'd like to go back to that family that called and said, "Oh, we have a daughter that's queer." And you said, "Great." And they said they'll vote for you. So what kind of follow-up do you do with somebody like that, who obviously is interested, involved, but cautious?
Yeah, because of the resources that we have here and because of my involvement with PFLAG and Pride, I was able to actually give them connections like, look, but just to be clear, I was calling them. This is when I was doing constituent
Okay.
calls, but they disclosed that because of my mailer. And so I was like, if you ever want to get involved or if you ever have any questions, first and foremost, here is my number. The number I am calling you from is my personal cell.
Great.
So you can call me. But then I would also give them resources for PFLAG and Southern New Mexico Pride. And also we have some nonprofit organizations that do a lot of stuff for queer youth. So I would give them all that information.
Okay, good. I'm curious because, of course, now we're becoming the experts in some of these things that I don't know anything about. I know a lot about things.
Yeah, it's
Not
Las Cruces.
everything.
Yeah, Las Cruces is a town of about 120,000 in the city proper. And I always joke, but there's some truth to it, is like it's 2 degrees of separation. Like
Uh-huh. Got it.
there's a lot of community building. And in my work through PFLAG and Pride, and then also running the Green Chamber of Las Cruces, I've been a community advocate for a long time. And so I have the wonderful honor of knowing these different organizations and how you can get involved in them.
So what do you like about the job you do?
I like connecting people. I like
Mhm.
connecting people. And, with the Green Chamber, I went from being a career journalist for 20 years to helping uplift our local businesses. And with the Green Chamber, we started in 2010 because Las Cruces got an Olive Garden and the whole town went nuts. Yay, we're finally a real city because we have an Olive Garden.
I can tell
And
you're in Olive Garden City.
no, no. And
Go
yet
on.
we had 3 locally owned Italian food restaurants that were saying, what about us?
Mhm.
And through my work with the nonprofits and like PFLAG and Pride, whenever I would go and ask for donations, local businesses would always give donations. They would never hesitate. Whereas chains usually have to check with their main office or their regional office.
Right.
And so when I came on to the Green Chamber, I was like, I've got a job now where I get to uplift these people that have helped our nonprofits for years.
Yeah.
And there are statistics that show that locally owned businesses give back to local charities 350% more than do national chains.
Whoa, that's good to know, huh?
Yeah, and it's because they're invested in the community. Chances are they employ our friends, our neighbors, or our family, and they realize their role as a business, a locally owned business, is to help give back. And so when I joined the Green Chamber, it was really nice to be able to help uplift them and be the big mouth for them while they were busy trying to run their business. And so I like to be able to talk about our small businesses. I like to be able to give them opportunities to highlight what they're doing because they do such great work, but they're horrible about self-promotion. They don't talk about the good things that they give back to in the community. And I'm like, but you do. Let's share that with people, please.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
They work hard, but they don't back.
They do.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. So what's your next challenge to be well, you're already a senator. That's great. So did you have a big party when you won that?
No, because of COVID.
Oh,
It
right.
was no, we
So the
didn't.
party is still in the future.
Yes, there will be for this next election, because for me, what was so disturbing was the basic lack, the disregard for human life during the pandemic. And there was no way I was gonna ever risk anybody getting sick. Even when I'm still up at the Capitol, we have a legislative session every January, and it's either 30 days or 60 days. I still wear a mask in areas because I've had COVID once. I was really lucky that it wasn't bad. But we have, millions of people who've died because of it and people who are impacted by it. And so, we will have another party. We did my neighbors next door. We have a tight-knit neighborhood. Our street we call Lesbo Vista because there's a lot of lesbians who live on this street. And some of our closest friends live right next door. Hmm.
Yeah, good.
So on election night, they were having an outside party, and I was having a watch party online on Zoom. And my campaign manager and another friend of ours who's queer, who used to work with the clerk's office, the county clerk's office, they were just nerding out about what it means when the votes come in, when precincts are reporting. And we had people stay on, or during my primary, we had people stay on until 12:30 in the morning. My results were known at 1:15 in the morning. So
exciting.
I'm sorry.
How exciting.
It was exciting. It was exciting.
It's exciting to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, it was, and for me, it's really interesting because I feel so strongly about how representation matters. Because I think, when you and I were younger, we didn't see people who looked like us doing things that we're doing, right? There was no
I
visibility.
almost lost my job because I assumed that someone that I was training was a lesbian. And I made that sort of verbal connection with her. She went to my boss and was demanding that my job, that she was not a lesbian.
Wow.
So I learned.
Yeah.
Shut
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Well, and those are those strategies that we learn.
Just do your job. What she did outside of work was nothing to do with me in the job.
Yeah.
So you cannot be totally sure.
Yeah. You know, it's in our legislature, we have three queer people in the legislature. There's a woman named Liz Stefanix, who was the first lesbian in our state legislature in the 90s, and she experienced horrible discrimination. Then she left the Senate for a while, and now she's back, which is great because she really paved the way for me. There was one day where I was able to introduce my wife, who was sitting up in the gallery, which is up above the Senate floor, and I was able to introduce my wife because of her. And
Great.
you know, I had to say, you know, Senate family, please welcome my wife, Dr. Shar Ullman, to the state capitol, and even the Republicans had to applaud. And then there's also Senator Leo Jaramillo. He is also part of my freshman class, and you know, he's brilliant. His secret power is that he talks to everybody and he's nice, and you know, Republicans don't know what to do with him.
That's,
Um,
that's a great thing to end with. I was going to ask you if you had a mentor. I'm sure you had some, but just that he talks to everybody.
Yeah, Leo talks to everybody. Liz has been a great mentor for this, but you know, as I take we're wrapping up, is that you know, one of the things that I feel was so important for me, and Leo does the same thing. Liz is a little bit older, so she navigates her outness a little bit differently. Um, but Leo and I are both like, we are gonna, you know, I mean, I've got this flag behind me, and I do that. This is where I do all my Zoom meetings, and I want people to see that I am queer. I talk about my wife just like anybody else would. We had a couple of bits of legislation that there are some of my more conservative colleagues who say horrible things when it comes down to this. In New Mexico, we have a bill that is supportive of gender affirming care, and we have reproductive rights. We will protect a woman's right to choose. We will protect those providers and not give their information up to anybody. And then a bill that I sponsored in the Senate was the modification to the Human Rights Act. So in 2003, we had a Human Rights Act that established a Human Rights Commission so that if people experience discrimination, they could take it to this Human Rights Commission. However, in 2003, some of the language was outdated. First and foremost, we used an inappropriate term for disabled people. There was the term handicapped, which actually stems from cap in hand. That's disabled people with disabilities. That's how they were expected to survive, was by begging. And it's a horrible term. So I always use the term disabled and put people first, person with a disability. So we updated that language, but then we also included gender identity, sexual orientation, some more current language. And what this bill does is that if you are a state institution, a university, or a church that receives state taxpayer money to provide services, you can't discriminate against these people.
That's great.
And so it was debated for 3 hours in the House. Because of my strategy, I guess, of looking at the session as a season of Survivor, the television show Survivor, I developed some good relationships, and people that I knew would normally debate my bill to as long as they could. None of them did. There was the only one who tried to issue an injunction back when we got married, who is a racist, homophobic, horrible person. He wanted to make sure that churches were exempt from this. And I was like, you can discriminate all you want in your church. You just can't use my money to do it. And so that bill passed.
Right.
Yeah, that bill passed with only 30 minutes debate in the Senate. And then it went to the governor. And so we are one of these states that also, did you know that if you changed your name in New Mexico, you would have to publish it in the paper to let everybody know that you were changing your name. So if you're a trans person and bringing in your new name so that you're not referred to by your dead name, if you're escaping a domestically violent situation or abusive situation and you want to get your maiden name back or change your name for protection, you would have to publish that in the paper. Well, we don't have that anymore because we passed a bill that does not require you to publish your name change.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, New Mexico is a pretty great place to live. You know, it was interesting when I was talking earlier about how some of my colleagues on the floor say horrible things when legislation comes up. I decided to share with them my coming out story. Mm-hmm. And you always address the president of the Senate. You go through the president of the Senate so that you're not directly attacking a particular Senate legislator. And so with the gender affirming care bill, I was like, before we start comments and debate on the bill, I would like to share with you my coming out story. And the reason why I want you to know this is because I want you to understand how what you're going to say here today is going to impact somebody that you love. And I talked about how my mom's sister, when I was 12 years old, she was there for my father's funeral. And notice I call her my mom's sister. She is not my aunt. She made the comment to me that all gays should be put on an island and nuked because they caused AIDS. I was 12. I was 12 years old at the time. I talked about ways that language can hurt people that you care about. And I went into that because I wanted my colleagues to think about it, because there's two that are really just vehemently against. They're vehemently homophobic. One of them has 7 children. The chances are pretty great that one of those kids is queer. Will be. Yeah. And, and it's like representation is so critical, and being able to see people like yourself in archives, in public office, on television, creating change in their community is so important. There was a woman that I talked with after my first legislative session, and she was one of the advocacy groups. She was with one of the advocacy groups, and it was on a Zoom meeting, and she was like, I testified in a couple of your committees during the session. She's like, and my daughter's a lesbian, and she showed me her little rainbow bracelet. And she said, my daughter, Emma, heard you in committee. And when she heard you, she said to me, I can be a senator too.
Yeah, that's what this is about.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about.
Uh-huh. That's great. That is, thank you. That's really wonderful. Yeah, you're wonderful.
Oh, thank you. So are you. I always lose it on that one, because it's like,
it's
I think
core.
Yeah. And when I was that age, I was like, oh, Jodie Foster's a lesbian. Okay, I know she's a lesbian. We had Barney Frank as the only out public figure. And, poor Barney did what he could, but, he had so many challenges at the time. And so it was like, I was desperate to find people who looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're everywhere, and we're leading by example. And that's why it's so important.
That's a great story. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm closing with my question. If you knew that your life was ending soon, how would you like to be remembered?
For that.
For your coming out story?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And letting other queer people know that they have a future.
Mm-hmm. It's about life.
Yeah.
It's like the child. It's about her life. She came close to not having it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm also a crier. I'm like a masculine presenting lesbian who is a triple Leo, but I cry.
You should never cry. Right.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. I'm fine with it.
It's okay to cry.
Right. It is. It is. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. It's interesting. We through my job, I got to help coordinate the designation of the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument, which is an iconic site of Las Cruces, and I did that through my job. And so I was able to go to Washington, D.C. when Obama designated the monument, and I'll show you this little picture.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah. And at that time, and I was speaking on the stage for it and on behalf of New Mexico. And when we got to meet Obama, he had said, thank you for all your work with the National Monument. And I said, Mr. President, thank you for your support for that. And I said, and my wife and I thank you, because this was in 2014 that the monument was designated. So marriage was legal by then. And he looks at me and he goes, you're welcome. And then puts his arm around me and takes that picture.
That's great, huh?
Yeah.
And he's from Chicago. There you go.
I know. We've driven by where his house was.
Good.
Yeah.
So
thank you for all your work on this. I appreciate
thank
that. I know
you.
it's a lot of work to do, but I'm sure it's a labor of love.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. It was nice meeting you.